book that is just me. I've been in some books where I have essays and stuff, but this is all me. And it's semi-autobiographical, but it's also a lot of my opinion, a lot of ranting, which if you follow my website, that's pretty much what I've been doing for the last 20 years. So I decided to put it in book form to kind of give a guideline of how I've become who I am now, and I've been doing this since as long as I can remember. Like, I'm 54, and I've been watching this stuff on TV and movies since like 5 or 6, so it's been pretty much my life. And when I decided to write the book, I figured the one thing that I know I could write about was my own experiences. I've been going to conventions for over 30 years, so I've been to a few of them. And I just wanted to explain my love of the genre, and hopefully that would resonate with other film fans that are, we're all the same anyway. But shows how I got to where I am, explaining my passion. Hopefully that resonates with other fans, that even though we've all had different experiences, you guys would be able to relate to it. I talk about conventions. I talk about some of my favorites. I don't believe in top 10 lists because there's too many films to narrow it down, so don't ask me what my top film is. I talk about how I got started growing up and watching a lot of made-for-TV movies. The town I grew up in, we didn't have a movie theater, so my experience was a lot from TV, black and white, back in the old days when we had 3 channels. So growing up and watching those movies, then when I moved here to Illinois, worked in a movie theater, and that's when it really exploded, where I was watching between movies and the video boom, watching any and everything I could get my hands on. And I'm still doing that. All this years later, I still haven't seen everything. There's still so many films left untouched, and I think that's the beauty of the horror genre, is you can be doing this forever and we'll never get through all these movies. So there's always an untouched ample of titles out there. You just have to look for them. And that would be the one thing that I would encourage people to do, is look outside the norm, look outside of Hollywood, look outside the US, because there's a lot of films made in other countries that are just incredible. So if you limit yourself to a certain subgenre or a certain country, you're losing out on a lot of great cinema. So the book is, like I said, a lot of my opinions, which I will argue with. That's one of the beauties, again, about being a fan. You don't have to agree on the movies as long as we agree on the genre. So, if anybody has any questions, we can go to there. Otherwise, I'm just going to sit here and keep drooling about how great horror movies are. I will say that it's one of the reasons that I love about horror movies is because, and I'm sure every one of you guys are going to realize this, we are not part of the normal society. Horror movies is the second oldest film genre, and I'm talking like 1889, I think. 1889. It's the most profitable, but it's always the redheaded stepchild. We're never going to be legit, and unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but the Oscars never give us any credit, except Del Toro won Best Director and Best Film in 2017. So that kind of took the punch out of my ranting that we'll never get the appreciation that he goes ahead and wins. So, but again, when like Misery won, that's a thriller. When Silence of the Lambs won, that's a thriller. When we all know those are horror movies. So the fact that we're still gathering at conventions like Flashback, celebrating the horror genre, that will never go away. So Hollywood can call it whatever they want. We know what it is. So, do we have any questions? Yes?
I know you said you don't want to talk about your favorites per se, but for people who are just beginning, who haven't had a chance to explore horror from other countries, were there other country horror films that you would recommend for people to look into?
The Spanish horror is huge, and that started back in the 60s. A guy guy named Paul Naschy was making films in a country that didn't want horror films, and he was making them because he loved the genre. So anything that Paul Naschy made from the 60s up until early 2000s before he passed away, but even modern day, there's Alex de la Iglesia made a film. His first film was called Action Mutante, which is about handicapped terrorists kidnapping the rich and the beautiful for money, and it is a very dark comedy with a lot of horror elements to it. But he's gone on more recent stuff is like Witchy and Bitchy, and he doesn't play in one genre. He goes everywhere. The Last Circus is another one. Another Spanish director is Jaime Belagaro. He did the first 2 Rec movies. He co-directed. He directed the 4th one. But he did a movie called Sleep Tight, which is extremely disturbing, but it's really well done. If you move over into, if you go to New Mexico, if you like the old classic Universals, Mexico made a bunch of movies in the 50s that were right out of like Universal. They were black and white, a ton of style. They took it seriously. They're really, really entertaining. The real key is just to keep looking. If you find a film that you like, find out who the director is, go on IMDb, start looking at what his other films are, go from there. Look at who maybe the special effects guy is, the actor, if you like what he did. I always say it's kind of like a spider web. You start with one place and you start going to different areas. Horror reference books, which is what I generally sell at these conventions, and the reason is because I love horror reference books. That's how we learn about movies before the internet. So you find a film guide, you start going through there and you do a checklist. The film guides are like the top 100 films, horror films. I might not agree with their choices, but it's a nice checklist to go through and make sure that you've seen what, at least what these guys are considering the must-sees. And in there you'll probably find a lot of really good films outside the genre. If you go to Japan, when The Ring came out in 1998, not the American, but the original, that exploded over there. So there were a lot of Japanese ghost movies. In Hong Kong, there's a series called The Chinese Ghost Story. There's 3 of those. I would highly recommend those. You'll see stuff in there that you've never thought you'd ever see. And then of course you go to Italy, you have the giallo, you have the zombie, you have a lot of the gore films. Depending on your taste, I mean, you can go nuts just in that little subgenre alone. Hopefully that helps. Anybody else?
Hey John, how you doing?
So far so good. It depends on what you're going to ask me, Kevin.
All right, it actually kind of bounces right off of what you were talking about. Your book does a great job talking about the Spanish, the Mexican, the Hong Kong. I love that you bring up Untold Story. That is the creepiest fucking movie.
Do you know he won a Hong Kong Oscar for Untold Story? That's how demented that is. Yeah.
But the question is there a blind spot in your own life? Is there a country or a subgenre that you don't feel that you've explored?
That's the beauty of it. They're all over the place. When the Japanese horror genre blew up with Ring, all of a sudden you have all these Korean films that were coming out, like The Host. And everybody's jumping on the bandwagon, and granted some of them are just rip-offs of what's popular, but it's getting their foot in the door. There's a Russian film that just came out on Severin just put out called Vij. That was made in 66, I think. When I first seen that, like maybe 10 years ago, I had never even heard of it before. Never came across it in my reference books. It's one of the most visually stunning films you will ever see, and it was made in the 60s. And the camera effects that they used were unbelievable. And if you have not seen it, I would highly recommend you to go to Severin's table and pick it up, and no, they're not paying me yet. But it's one of those films that visually speaking is amazing. So Russia is not a country that is known for horror films, so that's another one that just blew me away. But there's always a ton of stuff to be looking for. The hard part is finding the titles to start with, and if you don't like it, don't stop there, keep digging, because you may just fall on a dud, and you never know. We were talking before, there's apparently a whole subgenre of films from Argentina. I've never seen any of them, so now that's got my interest peaked, and I'm going to start seeking out these films to explore that region of the country because I have no idea. That's the beauty of the horror genre. You'll never be done. There's always stuff coming out. Anybody else? Yes.
You mentioned Severance, and do you think we're like in the golden, like maybe the best home release market right now with Vinegar Syndrome, Severance, Scream, like putting out these older films in the best they've ever looked? Like you having gone through and started in black and white, like you mentioned on TV, do you think now's the best time, or is it VHS?
Yeah, yes and no. I'm going to put my grumpy old man hat on. Because when I grew up, we had to seek for movies. You had to spend years looking for movies, looking through the TV guide. You guys probably don't even know what a TV guide is, but you would page through this to see what movies were coming out. And I'm talking like old Universal movies, anything that was never released, we could never see it. We'd read about them in the books, but they were never available. So when you did find it, it was spectacular. Nowadays, you hear about a movie, you can go on YouTube, you can go on Amazon, and within a day or instantly, you can watch the movie. So on the one hand, that's awesome, but I think we've lost the quest, the search for it, and because everything is so instantaneously available, we don't have the patience to dig into it. You'll go 5 minutes into a movie and go, yeah, that's boring, let me go on to another one. So I think because the selection is so huge right now, we don't appreciate the stuff that's coming out as much as I think we should. But on the flip side, the fact that Severance putting out the wax mask, Fulci's last film that he almost did, that's amazing. I mean, we get to see an uncut print of Anthropophagus on Blu-ray. I mean, back 20 years ago, the even concept of that blew my mind. We were just trying to get a crappy bootleg from a Japanese Laserdisc that might be 3rd or 4th generation that you can kind of see what's going on. So it's great that all these are being available, and it shows that these people understand the value of these. They know the fans are gonna want to see it. But I do think because it's so widespread, we're almost like a kid in a candy store, and we're eating everything, and all we're doing is getting hopped up on sugar, and we're not really appreciating what we're seeing. So we got to slow down a little bit and really watch what we're seeing. You had a question?
What's your opinion of new filmmakers like Ari Aster and Jordan Peele?
I really like Get Out. I tend to watch more. I'm trying to still catch up on the older movies and the newer ones. But I like what we're seeing, and I also like the fact that they're standing up and saying this is a horror film. That they're not going, well, it's a social commentary, blah, blah, blah. No, it's a horror film. I think we still live in that, and we don't want to, we're the redheaded stepchild. It's a negative connotation to be a horror film, and now there's a lot of directors like Del Toro that are standing up and saying, no, this is what I'm making. I still think there's a lot of great filmmakers out there that are still creating films. I think it was a couple years ago, there was a made-for-Netflix movie called The Ritual. It's one of the most original films I've ever seen. It was amazing. There's I think it's from Norway or maybe Sweden, called Border, not The Border, just Border. And that plays on all the different genres. And again, it's one of the most original films that I've seen. Might be a little difficult to get a hold of a copy, but it's really, really good. Any other questions?
What was the first film you physically owned?
Physically owned?
Like a tape or?
I can remember the first 2 movies I rented with my first VCR, and that was Legend of Hell House and The Dunwich Horror. The first one I owned, back in the video days when VHS came out, to buy a VHS, they were like $80 a tape. So I never would buy them until they became sell-through. And then I was buying a lot of tapes, and then you got into the stupid thing of collecting them. And then you had to have the big boxes and the clamshells, and that was just a wormhole you didn't want to go down. Nowadays, it's a huge collecting market. Unfortunately, I think they're more worried about collecting the actual movies instead of watching them, which is a shame. But if I'm paying $100 for a VHS tape, I'm not going to be putting it in a VCR. I'd be too scared that it would crinkle. But I honestly, I don't remember the first movie I bought. I'm too old, that was too long ago.
I think you said something at the beginning about made-for-television horror, which are some of the hardest ones to find these days. Some of the ones that, if we're of a certain age, that we grew up with. But what are some of the ones that you recommend, the strongest, that maybe are a little harder to find?
Well, fortunately, there's like the Night Stalker series is available, or the first two films, the Night Stalker and the Night Strangler. Thanks to Blu-ray and stuff, those are widely available. The Night Gallery series. As far as made-for-TV movies, there was one made in, I think it was 1974, called Frankenstein: The True Story, which was about as far from the true story as possible, but it was, as a 9-year-old kid watching this, it just blew me away. There was stuff on TV, there was a severed arm that I had never seen before. The creature pulls the bride's head off. It just blew my mind. That's available, thankfully, in the uncut version. The beauty of 70s TV movies is sometimes the bad guys won. It wasn't a happy ending that was all tied up and everybody went home whistling. Like the Norliss tapes, which was another Dan Curtis one. Anything Dan Curtis did in the 70s was pure gold. From Dead of Night to, like I said, the Night Stalker, the Norliss tapes. There's one called The Devil's Daughter. Now some of these are available. Some of these are available through other means. I'm sure if you go to YouTube, you could probably call up a lot of this stuff. Karen Black made a ton of made-for-TV movies in the 70s. A lot of those are not available on DVD or anything, but again, if you go on YouTube, you can at least see the films. I think, again, it's one of these things that the more you look into it and do a little research, you can find a ton of different titles that are going to be entertaining that were made 30, 40, 50 years ago. And the made-for-TV, and that was the year I grew up. There was an ABC special series called, I don't remember what the actual series was, but there was an episode called The World Beyond. It was an hour long, and it basically dealt with a golem or a mud monster. Joe Beth Williams was in it, Bernard Hughes. I watched that with my two nieces, and the house they lived in had an unfinished basement. They would never go in their basement after watching them because they were for sure that the mud monster was down in the basement. And even to this day, if I bring that up, they get freaked out about it. That has never been released, which just kills me because I have a very crappy bootleg copy of it that's got the original commercials and everything, which is kind of cool, but I want to see a really nice, pristine print of that. And the beauty of stuff when you see as a kid, when you watch it now, sometimes it doesn't lose the charm because it reminds you of being a kid again, back when you were watching it, and it's like that nostalgic feel that's really cool. Anybody else? Yes?
You mentioned going on a hunt, finding this or that that's weird, and going into these genres, and I can relate to that. So what's like the last great find that you watched, and what's like the last, oh man, I'm never gonna watch this again.
See, there's a lot of films that I would say are really well made or that are important to the genre, but I don't like them. A good example of that is Cannibal Holocaust. I've seen it once, and I will never watch it again. I have a thing for animals. I don't like seeing that on the screen. But I wouldn't condemn the film because it is an important entry in our film genre. It all comes to personal taste, and now trying to think of something. Well, The Border is the last one that I've seen that just blew me away, and that was from a friend's recommendation. There's another film called Isolation that was made in 2005 that I'm always recommending because nobody has seemed to have seen it. It takes place on a dairy farm in Ireland, and I knew nothing about it when I watched it, and it's just unbelievable. I would highly recommend when you do come across something, don't read too much about it, just watch the film, because it's better going into it completely blind instead of having preconceived notions of what it's going to be about. It's tough for me because the minute someone asks me what's this, then my mind goes completely blank trying to come up with one. But I do think that there are films that you're going to see that may disturb you. I think it's important to go through it because it is, like I said, with Cannibal Holocaust, it's an important film in our genre, but personal taste, I didn't care for that. I like cannibal films like Deranged, Texas Chainsaw. Those don't have an effect on me. Zombie films, all the gore. But if there's a cannibal movie with the guys in the grass skirts, like Dr. Butcher MD, that stuff just freaks me out, and I can't. I have trouble with it. Maybe it's just a personal taste what scares me. I don't know, but those would creep me out. I hope that answered your question. I'm not really sure. Anybody else? Yes.
You've been watching horror movies for a while now. So how do you feel about like the newer movies nowadays where they utilize CGI more than practical effects and making it as convincing way as movies?
If I don't know it's CGI, I'm completely happy with it. If it looks like a cartoon, then it's not gonna fly. But on the same token, I also love movies like Robot Monster. Has anybody seen Robot Monster? It's a guy in a gorilla suit with a diving helmet almost on there. That's not the most realistic monster. I think it's a riot. Some of the CGI though, the problem is that they don't have the budget for it. The best example I have of that is American Werewolf in Paris. All the werewolves are CGI and they literally look like terrible cartoons. So that will take you out of the film if it's done really shabby. But on the flip side, if it's an older 50s movie that's kind of cheesy, I have no problem with that. If you're gonna have CGI, like I said, just make sure it's blended well where it doesn't take you out of the story or out of the film, because that's the worst thing a filmmaker can do when you start, well, let me check my email or let me do this, and you've already lost the audience. So either don't have it, do it somewhere else, a different way, more creative. Back in the 70s, these guys were making movies with no CGI. They just thought of a different way to do it instead of going, well, we'll just put it in later. And then that's when it usually fails. So if you're a filmmaker, don't think of CGI as an easy crutch because that's not necessarily going to keep your audience. At least that's my feeling. Anybody else?
Does anything scare you anymore?
Besides being up here, no. I don't know if the last time I remember having a nightmare was Jaws, and I seen that in 1977. And I haven't been in the beach or the water since then. That I can vividly describe the nightmares I had after seeing that right now. I mean, it affected me to the core. So watching any movies in the water, like Piranha, I've never seen open water because I know what the story is. I know how it ends. I don't want to go there. So anything in the water kind of gets to me. I can still watch Jaws now, and there's certain scenes that I have to make sure that I don't get brought into it because it will bother me. I think it comes something to do with being eaten alive because I watched the Blob, the original Blob on TV, or at least part of it, because I kept turning it off when the Blob came on. Up until the part where they go to the doctor's office and he looks in the window and you see the Blob on the doctor, that's the last part I've seen. Turn it off, no, I can't do this. So I've seen it since then, but so that's the only thing that really gets under my nerves is the shark movies or the piranha, the water stuff. I've seen movies like, has anybody seen Tonight She Comes? That movie's the first time in a long time that I actually almost gagged. There's some scenes in there that are not necessarily extremely gory, but it really kind of hit me. It's a great movie, by the way, very different. But being actually scared, I don't know if I've become desensitized, but it doesn't affect me that way. I mean, there's movies that will affect me. When me and my wife seen Pet Sematary the first time, the original, that's kind of, because we had a kid at the time, we still do. But yeah, but when you become a new parent, anything with children in there is going to have an effect on you. And speaking of that, there's a British movie called The Children. Has anybody seen that?
Yeah.
That's pretty visceral, even though there is some gore in there, but it's just the concept of the movie. So things like that, especially if you're a parent, kind of hits you a little deeper than most. Anybody else? I don't know how we are on time.
Time for one more. Otherwise, just plug it in.
Okay, it's called Discover the Horror. It's out, available in the dealer room. I'm all the way down towards Tony, right across almost from Tony Todd. Do you have any other questions? Feel free, I'm here all weekend. I love to talk about movies, so come on out and see me. Thank you.